Hi, it's Michael and Anthony here presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for the current challenges, but also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week, with Anthony Turner from the Small Business Mentoring Service, we'll interview a different small business expert or a fellow business owner and get them to share their best tips and insights for you, the listeners. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and is heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. Thanks also to our supporters, Kerr Capital and the Small Business Mentoring Service. Okay, so welcome to another edition of Small Business Banter. Really happy to have in Janet Bond, who's the co-founder of Wattle Road. Janet's going to tell us about what Wattle Road is all about and a bit about her personal and professional journey. So welcome in today, Janet.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you in. Anthony Turner, co-host from Small Business Mentoring Service. Welcome again, Anthony, to another edition.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be back again.
It's fun. We do have fun doing these interviews. And Janet, if I had to capture it really quickly, you've co-founded Wattle Road Australia in recent times, but prior to that, you've had a long history with regional, businesses, regional property, regional living. So, do you want to just an extensive career in media and management? Do you want to give listeners just a couple of minutes about where you've come from and also Wattle Road, what it is today, and what it's all about?
Excellent, thank you. Well, I started in journalism, but very quickly got into business and commercial journalism. And I was the editor of Business Magazine in Geelong for quite some years, and then went on to found one of News Corporation's first regional lifestyle magazines in Geelong, and I ran that for a decade. And that was all about advocating for a city and its people and making us feel proud about what we loved about our city, and also helping us be really proactive about making sure it was a great place to live. And then I started up a commercial publications division, which meant I was going out and talking to local businesses about how they could spread their message and how they could advocate for their business and what we could do to help them promote their business. And I just loved that. Then in 2011, I moved to Sydney, and I ended up managing News Corp's national real estate team. So I had reporters who were experts in their markets from Townsville to Hobart. So that was a fantastic role because I've always been really passionate about property, and I got to know so much about regional property markets. But then, in 2019, I left the corporate world, and I started up talking to an ex-News Corp colleague who was in sales about, business ideas and what we could do without being hamstrung by the big corporate world. And she knew I was pretty passionate about what we could do regionally. And one day I rang her in lockdown, and I could hear lots and lots of birds. And I said to her, "Where are you? That doesn't sound like you're in Melbourne." She said, "No, I'm in Japarut." Now, the only thing I knew about Japarut was that Robert Menzies was born there. And I said, "You're a Sydney girl, used to, the corporate world.
The finery.
How on earth, and how are you surviving in Japarut?" Well, she had such a wonderful time. She'd escaped the latest lockdown in Melbourne. Friend had a house that needed to be put on the market in Japarut, so she went and lived there, and she, for the first time, discovered the real meaning of community. She said she'd go down and pick up her post, and the local post office guy would know her by name. Twice a week they'd be down at the local pub, meeting people and having an evening meal. She just loved it. So one of the barriers when she moved to Japarut was that she could find no information about it. She could only do the Wikipedia thing, say there's 350 people around, and that's where Bob Menzies was born. So we brainstormed that, and we have, being so immersed in the property markets, I had seen this trend of people moving to the regions, and we just wanted to launch a site that was a guide to people considering this life change, this lifestyle change, but also one that would inspire people by talking to people who'd already done it. And through those stories, we hope that, people will say, well, this is what not to do, this is what to do. And we found one really important thing was that people need to explore the regions before they find the town that suits them. And then we broke it down to say, okay, explore first, spend time, weekends away, whatever, in the regions you think might be a good fit. Then you're looking at the property market. If you're working from home, you'll need a study. So we did a lot of research on property. Then about jobs. I think it's a surprise to people when they hear the latest figures that there's 66,000 job vacancies in regional Australia at the moment. I think there's a story that wasn't being told about the regions, and we just immersed ourselves in it, and we just love what we do.
And that is the business we know as Wattle Road.
Wattle Road, yeah, wattleroad.com.au.
Yeah, okay. So you talked about property and talked about jobs.
Yes.
What we're particularly keen, is the linkage. Then it's tree change and sea change. Seems to be a bit of a phenomenon, and one of the blockages is that, notwithstanding 66,000 jobs, there's sometimes people may need to consider starting or acquiring a business. As another. It's not the only way, but
No.
That's something we're keen to chat to you about. So you describe you're kind of connecting people here for shared experience about what it's like to.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit more about how you do that? Is it case studies? Is it on the site itself? I haven't actually I've only skimmed look at the site.
Yes, well, it's amazing. One thing that I've found is that when you talk to people in regional towns, they've got the time to talk to you, and they really love talking about where they live.
Proud of it. Yeah.
Oh, totally, yeah. And, I raised my 3 children in Geelong, and know that it is found that it was very easy to make connections in a regional town, far more than it has been now I'm back in Melbourne or in Sydney. So I would just ask around and say, do you know anyone who's moved to town lately? And where did they come from? And then I'd give them a call and we'd have a chat about what that journey was like. We interviewed a woman who's moved from Melbourne to Apollo Bay and set up her psychology practice. She took her family and young teenagers to Apollo Bay out of, I think, Brighton they were living in.
Right.
I talked to another woman who was a physiotherapist who had a very big practice in Sydney, but her main goal was to exit Sydney and get that practice stable enough for her to then move it to a little town called Milton. So some of the most inspiring stories have been people who've actually moved their business or set up a new business. And I'd love to tell the story of the cobbler in North Shore. Well, actually, he started off as an accountant in the North Shore. Yep. He wanted to get out of Sydney, sell his home. He had, was cashed up, bought this lovely big home from his family. He'd been living in something quite small. And he saw the local cobbler was for sale. So he thought, right, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to learn how to repair shoes. And he's now working in that and owns that cobbler.
It's a classic case of maybe he didn't want to continue working as an accountant.
No,
maybe there wasn't a job, so he's decided that it's time to take the move or make the move, and I'm going to do something to earn a living. So I buy a business in a completely unrelated area. It's fascinating.
We talk about the rejuvenation of the regions, but Michael, it's as much about rejuvenation of people and rejuvenation of our lives and living in a way that perhaps we have always dreamt.
Yeah, I think, Janet, it's a lovely story, and I think it's something that's really, really powerful in the sense that more and more people are now, we see the classic shows of Escape to the Country, whether that's in Australia or England or whatever it might be, and everybody's got these visions of going and being somewhere else. sometimes it works out really well, sometimes not so well. But I guess, what if somebody's considering a move like this? What are the sorts of key things do you think they should be doing? You touched on a couple of visiting the area before. How can they really go about researching and making sure it is a right decision?
Look, I think I'll use the example of the physiotherapist from Sydney. She spent a year visiting Milton. She knew where she wanted to go in the region. She spent a year there, and then she decided that she really wanted to take her physiotherapy practice or set something up. So instead of just bounding in and finding a rental to set up her business, she got involved with went and to the local Chamber of Commerce. She spoke to other allied medical people in the community to see if there was a gap and if there was going to be enough of a business to build up. Then she decided not to buy. She decided that she would rent for a while to get a real feeling, rent a business premises and rent a residential place. To get a real feeling whether this was going to be a good move, because it was such a major move. She was a single woman, and she wanted to know if the community and certainly the business community would be supportive. So then she found herself in the middle of the fires in that terrible bush fires summer that we had, and she realised that while that was something she hadn't contemplated, living in a place of risk, she found firsthand how that community pulled together. So she took some time to get to know the town. So look, I think if you've got a family, it's important to go and visit local schools. But one of the first things that's important is to have all your stakeholders in your sphere on board with you. So, make sure that, your partner is okay with it. Make sure that you get the kids over the line. Make sure that your friends say, well, that's it. Don't say, well, that's it. I'm never visiting if you're 2 hours away. Make sure that there is some discussion and real thought around this big lifestyle change. And look, the other thing I think is if you move somewhere where people can visit, or if you can get back to the city and your old life fairly easily, like a Geelong, a Ballarat, a Bendigo, and some of the wonderful places in Gippsland on those train lines, it will make it an easier move.
Yeah, we as a family we went through that about 2.5 years ago, and I didn't call them stakeholders, but it was, the kids, 3 children, adult children, and it was, everyone was inspired about the idea of, doing something we'd talked about as a family for a long time, but in the end it was taking a bit of a leap of faith, and it feels like, and I'm interested to know, in what numbers do you think this is happening across the country? I mean, in the press, reading about tree change and sea change, the rejuvenation. Are there any? Do you have any idea of the numbers of people contemplating this or actually doing it?
Yes, I think the last stats in terms of net migration was, so Net was talking about people who come in and then people who also leave. So net migration was 43,000. But in terms of migration, if you don't take the people who then came out, it was in the 200,000s. The
gross, so it's a couple of 100,000 people.
Yes. And they were the ABS statistics that were released last month. So, I also think that what they've seen is that people are no longer escaping the city, but they're being attracted and lured by what is on offer in the regions. And the latest research from the Regional Australia Institute pointed in the shift of people's thinking.
It's a really interesting point, that people are being drawn to go to these places. How's that impacted the regions where people are going to in terms of things like property pricing, in terms of livability? Because sometimes the move is made for a livability reason, and oftentimes when you get too many making the same move, the livability changes.
That's been a big shift, I think. Look, I was talking to an agent in Geelong recently who said to me that Geelong, they used to see people come from affordability, but that's because of so many people now moving out of Melbourne and buying in Geelong. It's not the affordability that it's the lure, that's the livability. Because really the property prices in regional Australia for the first time in 15 years have outperformed capital city prices. So the growth in those values was 6.9% in the regions and only 1.9% in the capital cities over the last quarter. So, there is a phenomenal growth in property. But, I would hope that wouldn't put people off. I'm still thinking that the benefits you get by living in a regional town outweigh.
Yeah. And by the way, we're chatting with Janet Bond from Wattle Road on today's edition of Small Business Banter. Janet, one of the things that I see, I've seen a lot, is a challenge, and it's kind of spiked in the last few years, where the people contemplate a move. In my context, they're often talking about regional businesses for sale, and as property prices continue to go up, this idea that you could cash out of Melbourne and buy a house and a business, is kind of like it's not evaporating, but it's the gaps reducing, and so I think the opportunity to buy a business and a property is a bit compromised because property prices have been so strong. And we need there's a lot of businesses in the regions, good businesses that need to be maintained for the sake of that community. They're central to that economy and so hopefully that there's a balance somewhere. There's a balance. Where do you see from a small business perspective in your travels and in your analysis? Where do you see the emerging areas of opportunity for if you put aside people like your physio actually just transplanting or moving their business? Do you see other areas of high opportunity?
Look, I think one thing that the regions have done is promote their local produce really, really well.
Yeah.
And I recently did a story about craft breweries. So these old pubs, and you can see them on the market. There's a number of old pubs in small towns on the market at the moment. Like there's a lovely little one in Smeaton at the moment that is on the market that are on a tourist trail, that would be, Dales through to Clunes, that Smeaton Hotel, that they just could be rejuvenated with instead of being the local pub, being the craft brewery. Now, 2/3 of craft breweries that have set up have landed in the regions. And when I was doing
that's across Australia.
Yeah, yes,
2/3 are in the regions. Wow.
And before COVID hit, there was a craft brewery setting up in the regions, one every 6 days. So it was just an example of, craft beer's sort of taken off, but then people are seeing the opportunity to be part of a community, as the pub always is. It's the local meeting place, but rejuvenate it by putting in, and there's now these wonderful little small systems that can go into a country pub that doesn't take up the whole building, and then also puts the place on the map. The Forest Brewery is a great example of that. This little town on in the Otways that is absolutely put Forest on the map. That Forest Brewery.
It's as a pretty avid craft beer fan, I mean, you will travel. There are destinations that you will go to. It's a bit like going to a country pub for that that pasty or that vanilla slice. That there seems to have been a trail of highly awarded bakeries right around the country that have the world's or Australia's greatest, chunky beef pie or whatever it might be. So, the destination, but it no doubt, does it feed into the broader opportunities for other producers, other, food?
Totally. Now, one thing that I discovered when I was doing that story was a local economist said that the trends are showing that we're returning to those days where small towns and towns had their local baker, their local fishmonger, their local butcher, their local brewer. So, yes, absolutely owning local produce. And we're so heightened to where our food and where our products come from now. And it's an area that the regions are really owning. Far more than cities.
In an earlier episode, we interviewed the founders of a business called The Village Co. And they're based in regional New South Wales, and they're putting some pretty sophisticated tech into supply chains. I won't go into the technical part of it, but what it was, and they ventured and bought they're working with butchers at the moment. And they went and bought a butcher shop to work out how this how this tech would actually help this butcher shop. But the idea was country butchers are at risk. The owners can't always find someone to come in and buy the business. The town will lose a butcher, then it'll lose something else, and the whole thing kind of folds in on itself. So they were just enabling these great producers of food to make their product available to more locations and including locally, so it just didn't get shipped out. And that's the kind of thinking that the good produce is made there. We wanted to stay there, and we wanted to the money to be. And their tagline was "Keep the money in the village." It was a wonderful,
how wonderful
tagline and a great aspiration to sustain these local economies. The craft brewing one, that was, I think from memory, was that some medical professionals that you were referring to who acquired or started one?
No, it wasn't medical professionals. They have, in the majority of these craft brewers are really those passionate craft beer people who are looking, but similar to that story of who's going to the regions, these people are attracted by a new lifestyle, getting out of the city. Well, a lot of them come from the finance industry and the banking industry, and they're leaving to say we want a different life. We want a different life for our family, and we want to be more connected.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest attractions, isn't it, for country life, is that attraction, that sense of community. And I know others that we've spoken to speak a lot about that. What do you see as there's obviously upsides and downsides for everything. What do you see as some of the key maybe upsides or downsides of making that move, from not researching it properly, but also to where are some of the hot areas that people are really seem to be congregating towards? You're talking about Geelong and the growth of Geelong as a result of this migration as well previously.
Yeah, look, I think transport is a really big factor when you're choosing a place to live. If you're near a major train line, look, even, and that just means even places like the beautiful little town of Camperdown, with one of the most beautiful historic streetscapes that you can see in Victoria, for instance. It's
incredible, isn't it? The streets, wide, treed, largely intact buildings, really well maintained.
I spoke to two general managers of global firms who bought a historic property in Camperdown and did it up and intend to retire there one day. But during COVID, they spent a wonderful few months being able to remote into work and do all their conferences, but live in Camperdown. So I think the Camperdown is one that's on that. You can go on the train to Melbourne, Warragul in Gippsland. I think transport is the key to finding a good spot.
Yeah, and I think whether you are going to remote work or start a business, the other one that keeps coming up all the time is bandwidth to underpin communication, and the operation of a business, I think. But yeah, the transport thing, right across the country, that seems to be an area for the feds to get their teeth into. But anyway.
And look, on Wattle Road, we profile towns, and we've also included what sort of NBN connection there is in that town. As you say, if you're going to work from home, or even if you're just living, we're so dependent on that sort of technology these days that that's one important thing to look at in the town.
Yeah. It's kind of like it's a mandatory, it gets, it seems to be all sorts of mudslinging about, one of the things that we found moving from Melbourne to near Geelong, which we did a couple of years ago, was the band on about my second day from the home office, the internet cut out, and it's the first time that it ever really happened. And in Melbourne, one of the things that you could rely on pretty much was a consistent bandwidth. So 6 or 8 times a day, the internet had cut out, and I realised I couldn't run a webinar with the confidence that I had previously had just evaporated quite quickly. So that's something that's, it's got to be fixed. And there's a lot of organisations. You mentioned the Regional Australia Institute and others that are, championing the idea of a move to the regions, and it's a great thing. So we've got to get infrastructure right and transport.
Well, I think the infrastructure is going to follow the growth. I think there has been such huge growth that the infrastructure, is going to have to be a priority of governments. And I also think the Victorian government's putting departments in regional towns like Ballarat and Bendigo and Geelong has been great for boosting population, boosting jobs.
Yeah, putting their money where they're, where it needs to be. There's as a personal advocate for the upside of making the move, it's I wish you well with Wattle Road. Get more people, not just in Victoria. We've talked a lot about Victoria. That's where we all are. But it's the same thing throughout the rest of the country. We want to see more. There's so many wonderful things across this country, and it's no question that people are, whether they want to or are being forced to, they're seeing more of these things because there are less choices to go other places outside of Australia. And I hope we all capture that opportunity and the small businesses, make the most of it.
It's a really exciting era, Michael, really.
Yeah, it sure is. Janet Bond from Wattle Road, thank you very much for your time today. Really thoroughly enjoyed that chat. We wish you well with Wattle Road.
Thank you. It was great to have a chat to you today. Thanks.
Thanks, Anthony.
Cheers, Michael.
So that's all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. Anthony and I continue to be inspired by bringing you small business experts and other small business owners and hearing their stories. For any of the links, resources or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact Anthony or myself, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com, or you can find us on both Facebook and Instagram. Anthony and I would love you to tune in at the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.